can say that I'm a person that does not give up. Yes, I don't like giving up. And I would like to stand up for, like, being a girl. I would like to show how being a girl is, like, we're not people who give up.
The GEEP project, which stands for Gender Equality, Education and Poverty, and particularly we're focusing on South Africa and Sudan, is trying to, in a sense, look at gender roles and gender issues, but we're also challenging the idea of gender equality in a very simplistic way. Not just looking at it as numbers where we can count how many girls go to school versus how many boys. We're trying to get a little bit deeper into the understanding of what it means. Perhaps using the word equity is much more correct to say, to use it for lack of a better word, because it's really about social justice and allowing both men and women, boys and girls, to, in a sense, define the kind of life they want to have and to be the kind of people they want to be. But in order to do that, they need to have an education. And so education needs to be more about than just getting them into schools, but also allowing them that opportunity to make those kinds of choices in their lives.
South Africa, a country of diversity, vibrant culture, and natural beauty. Yet, nearly 2 decades after apartheid, the gap between the rich and the poor remain the highest in the world. Unfortunately, South Africa's 19 million children, half living in poverty, bear the brunt of these inequalities. In particular, the girls.
My own understanding of gender inequality in South Africa is basically influenced by cultural or traditional practices, because we are a patriarchal society where the males are more dominant than females. Then in the context of South Africa, that has really bad effects, in fact, both at home and at school, because as children are growing up, they are kind of socialized in a society where the male is more dominant than the female. And unfortunately, those kinds of attitudes and those kinds of stereotypes come into the school setting, and they affect the way learners see themselves and the way they are seen by others, especially the male students. And also it affects the way teachers interact with them in the classroom situation. So in a nutshell, I would define gender inequality in South Africa as a very broad concept, which doesn't not only involve male domination, but it gets further than that in terms of having physically abused women and children, sexual abuse, mainly by male, adult males, as well as male learners.
Because I think gender in South Africa is in some ways an invisible issue. On the one hand, we have substantive equality in terms of gender equality in terms of the eyes of the law between men and women. But when it comes to social relationships, personal relationships, that's where the inequalities are most visible. But because the home domain is not part of the public domain, in that sense, gender issues become invisible issues.
Well, basically in our culture, I will just refer to our culture first, because that's where the whole thing starts. Men are regarded as dominant, and women recessive. So also our kids come with that culture to the school as well, whereby they normally say boys are the ones who should be in control, just like the staff as well. Women are supposed to respect men. Also in leadership, if you are a woman, you are regarded as inferior, That is how it is entrenched in our communities. So our children now also conform to those, values and standards.
In South Africa, the GEEP project worked with 2 schools. They decided to focus on one school in a township setting and the other in the rural Eastern Cape of South Africa. The research activities at these schools included observations, interviews, and training components for teachers and students. This work was conducted by established researchers as well as both PhD and master's students from Norway, South Africa, and Sudan.
The rationale behind the choice of the 2 schools was influenced by the fact that the environments are kind of different. For example, if you look at the township schools, there are things that are done or that are influenced by the setting, having the school surrounded, for example, by cultural activities and certain other issues relating to crime, which is very high in the townships. Whereas if you look at the rural school, the atmosphere is kind of open and is kind of relaxed, and most of the people in the rural areas still adhere to the cultural traditions, which in some cases the township learners are not exposed to, or are, they have limited exposure to them.
I am a PhD student in the GEEP project, and I'm doing my research in South Africa. And I've been collecting data at 2 schools, one in Cape Town, in a township there, and one in the rural areas of Eastern Cape. At the rural school in Eastern Cape, I experienced that talking to most of the girls, they had all these concepts that we talked about, like gender equality, democracy, and they were quite aware of what they were in theory, and they could explain those concepts to me. But at the same time, I could see that in practice and in the school, they were not doing this in practice. They had the student representative. He was a boy, and most of the students would say that it would actually be problematic for many of the students if he was to be a she. And so even though they were preaching gender equality, they still didn't do that in practice.
Girls stay at home and boys can do anything, like they can go anywhere and nobody would ask them where they come from, but girls can't do that. It's like a tradition. Like when you see a girl maybe on the street, like wonder, why is she doing here? Isn't she supposed to be at home?
Today, they were taught even at that early age that if you are a boy, you have to look after the cattle and the sheep and go and fight in the street. You are not supposed to cook and sweep and help your mother, because you'll become like a lady one day when you grow up. You see, so those are the issues that they address.
If I may ask, what kind of rules would you give to your wife? Can you just mention a few?
3 C's.
What do you mean by 3 C's?
3 C's stands for children, cooking, and church.
Okay. Can you explain what that means to all of us in terms of gender equality? You mentioned children, cooking, and the church. What does it mean? Can you explain briefly what it means to you as a man?
Oh, to me as a man, it's a great thing that women must stay at home looking at kids, as I said, children, and cooking for my kids. And I'm always busy as a man, so that means that a woman must be at church every time, you know.
If I may ask, why can't you go to church on your own if you are a leader?
It's because I'm busy as the leader of my family. I'm always busy, so the woman is not busy, she must be there. But I can go there if I've got time.
We thought there is a need for us to address the learners so that they treat each other equally. Even at home, they must be treated equally by the parents. So we thought where we need to have a meeting where we can invite the parents also, so that we talk about this gender issue. And I was so happy to see you coming, knowing that we have a parents' meeting. So I knew that today we are going to have that slot, so that you tell the parents about the gender issues.
Now I've seen that after we have come at this school, there is something changed from learners, the way they behave. Like they know that there is no work for boys and girls. They do everything. Boys and girls are equal. It's us all.
Well, I think there is a big change I've noticed. Basically, the teachers, actually the students from Norway, have been working with the grade 9s, that is the senior classes. So that's where it starts, and then it's gonna go down now to the little ones. So normally when I engage with them, there is that now respect, whereby they feel there should be equality, amongst themselves, because that is what they have been taught now. And then what is happening at home now in terms of the father being dominant, now they need to really educate the parents themselves, as to what is happening. So the lessons they are learning here, they go back now to their homes.
I think even the learners, after this project, they know how to treat each other. And even the teachers, they will know what to do, how to treat each other. So I think the project, at the end, the school is benefiting from the project.
The girls in my sample, they were very clear about how important education is in their lives. And they see it both as a way of getting more knowledge, being able to reason and think critically, but also they see it as a way of making a better future for themselves. They see that they get more opportunities, more choices, more freedom. And also the time spent in school here and now is very important because of the violent environment outside the school. They see the school as a place where they feel safe and can be themselves.
Education is the way to fight inequalities between genders. Education is how you can change societies.
Sudan, a country plagued by civil war for nearly half a century, the results of which have had a devastating effect on women and girls. Therefore, education is seen as a way to better themselves and develop the country as a whole. The GEEP project has focused on key issues related to gender roles in Sudan. The researchers in the project have also investigated the numerous challenges that hinder gender equality, with a specific focus on the basic education of girls.
Here in Sudan, the society thinks that men are better than women, and it's a fact maybe said by our religion. If they look further into Islam or different religions, there's nothing that will say something like that. Being different is not being inferior. Not one sex is better than the other just because they're different.
The challenges facing girls' education in Sudan, and particularly in the rural areas and among the disadvantaged groups, like the nomads, like the displaced people, like the refugees, these people, and especially their girls, suffer the challenge of getting into education because of many factors. These factors can be cultural factors, it can be poverty, because education is not completely free, they have to pay fees, and also other related issues. So there is a real great challenge if we are talking about education for all by the year 2015. Still, we have to do a lot in order to achieve that goal.
I guess when we look at access to education in South Sudan, it's particularly problematic for girls. Of course, boys also have their challenges. Due to the war, there's a lack of infrastructure and enough schools, enough teachers. But girls particularly suffer. And when they are able to perhaps generate some income, if their family does allow them to work outside the home, they experience also some challenges. One example was a student that I was interviewing that was part of the project that or part of the project school I was working with, was able to make some money, and the uncle that she was living with was keeping that money for her, and that was supposed to be used to pay for her school fees. Only when the school started, she went to the uncle for the money, and he said, well, I'm sorry, but I've spent it. And so here's an issue where this girl has struggled to save up some money, been allowed to work outside the home, expecting this to be part of her, whereas the uncle then took that money and spent it on himself or his family. So it's examples like these that make you think that, we talk about free education, but it's not free. There are all these hidden fees. They have to pay for exams, they have to pay for school books. If they don't have the proper shoes, they're sent home. So there are lots of access issues which aren't so out in the open that we don't always see.
In my research, looking at the educational aspirations for girls in IDP areas or disadvantaged communities, I'm looking at the social or the social and cultural factors those affect girls' aspirations, and how do they view education? What's the importance of education for them, and what do you want to do? They want to do through education.
Well, education for women in Sudan, it symbolizes several things. It symbolizes financial independence, social responsibility, self-actualization as a human being who sees herself as beneficial and not just relegated to the role of wife and mother.
I find that there are some differences that come out as a result of talking to those girls according to the different culture, the different upbringing, and socialization as well. For example, in the South, girls are having their own worries, all right, which is different from those in Khartoum. For example, they have the problem of the domestic activities that affects their being in a school, as well as the surrounding social aspects that prevent them from thinking further in their education. But the family, some parents, they say that they do appreciate the idea of educating their girls. That means it is a cultural difference that they notice from the North. In the North, some parents, they say that girls should not be out of home because they are valuable. Let's say that means they want to keep their girls in homes and safer environment, because in the North, for example, they have to go longer distances, okay, walking distances to get to the school. So the girls themselves, they worry that means that may affect their future imaging of their education.
Since 2010, the GEEP project has arranged international conferences, seminars, and workshops, with the aim of strengthening the cooperation between its participants by sharing academic knowledge and experiences, as well as increasing digital competence and improving academic writing skills. In January 2012, GEEP Sudanese partner university, the Afad University for Women in Khartoum, hosted a seminar where international guest professors and both students at the PhD and master level met for 3 days to share and discuss how global gender and educational policies are implemented in their respective countries.
At the moment, I'm in Sudan, and I'm a South African. We are here as the three partners, South Africa, Sudan, and Norway, with regard to our research agenda. We've invited other scholars from Australia and America, as well as the UK, in terms of having a debate and discussions around the issues of gender inequality. And I must say, as a scholar or a researcher within gender studies, I've gained a lot of experience, not only in terms of understanding the general issues or phenomena around the issue of gender and feminism, but also in terms of how to write academic articles, how to supervise students, and how to engage in gender or feminist approach debates, which are kind of general, which are kind of binding all of us in this project, which looks into gender equality issues.
I was very impressed with the university here in Sudan, the Afad University for Women. They are tackling enormous issues of the challenges that they face. And even when we were talking in public, they were able to discuss very controversial issues like prostitution, violence, like sexuality, things about HIV, and they were very open and very intellectually discussing about these challenges.
If we looked into Sudan and South Africa, although the contexts are different, but still we can learn from each other. For example, we can take some of the experiences, some of the approaches implemented by South Africa in reaching or in fulfilling the right of all girls to education. Because as I have noticed from my participation in this different workshop and the discussion with the researcher from South Africa, we notice that the problem now for them is not the access, not the number. The number for them, the problem is what is beyond that number. So we will make use of this, how to reach to the number, and also taking into account what is beyond the number.
I suppose one could say that Sudanese have a great deal to learn from the apartheid, and from the anti-apartheid movement, and the way in which the post-apartheid society has attempted to rebuild, let's say, dismissing, obscuring is probably a better word, obscuring ethnicity and race, with moderate success, only moderate success. Whereas the Sudanese are still grappling with what used to be called tribalism, but I tend not to use that word. But Sudanese are still grappling with deep and severe ethnic divisions, even after secession of the Southern Sudan. I think they could look to the Mandela spirit, the Sudanese could look to the Mandela spirit for some ideas about how ethnic groups might maintain their differences and still be able to live in some kind of peaceful situation. I don't mean to romanticize South Africa by any means, but certainly they seem to be further along the road of a pluralistic society that manages to function. Sudanese society is not really functioning right now. But what does South Africa have to learn from Sudan? Well, I'm sorry to say this, but from a lot of mistakes that the Sudanese have made, such as secession. So that if those ethnic identities in South Africa were to re-emerge, I think a very negative lesson might be what happened in Sudan with the separation of the North and South and the possible fragmentation of other areas as well.
Even the aid agencies these days are picking up the idea that the South can learn from the South, the global South, not the actual geographic South. so that there is much more equality in discussing equalities and inequalities. There's no sense that, oh, we've got it better than you have. There's a sense of real sharing. And the workshop demonstrated that. People listened to each other, they discussed with each other. The sense of being able to share mutual experiences and pick out from those contexts just what we can do and how powerful we can be if we work together.
I think the future of the GEEP project lies in being able to continue some of the research we've already started. We're now starting to see some interesting results, but they're still very preliminary. And this kind of basic research takes a while to be able to develop and to understand really what's happening. We might want to add some more context, different schools, perhaps even a different country. Our other kind of thinking around the project is to do both perhaps in-service training, which has come a call from the teachers to develop some kind of tools, but also pre-service training. But I think we also need to think about not just this kind of training, not just for the teachers themselves, but also how the teachers will be able to use that and teach about gender in schools.
I'm hoping that the project will have an impact at a range of levels. Firstly, I'm hoping that the teachers that we have worked with, both in the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape in South Africa, will continue to probe gender issues with the pupils that they teach in future, as they were exposed to during the project's lifetime. So that's the one aspect, because I think in opening up, both the girls and the boys have made teachers aware of what it is to be a girl and what it is to be a boy in an African township school in South Africa today. So I'm hoping that the teachers will continue with that kind of conversation. Secondly, I'm hoping that we as academics at UWC will insert that into our teacher training, teacher education programs and talk to our students to make them aware of what some of the gender issues are at schools and how we as academics can train teachers to be sensitive to those issues when they become teachers and when they go out into schools. And it's a kind of consciousness raising kind of process that I'm talking about here. Because I think often girls in particular don't have opportunities to talk about what is bothering them. And I remember when I was a high school teacher and I was an English teacher, the essays that the girls would write, the kind of horrible things that were happening to them that they would give vent to in these essays because this was the only opportunity somebody was going to read them and somebody was going to listen to them.
I think that when the project, even if the project ends in this 2012, I think the findings of these studies and the researches that will help a lot. Even it can be discussed with the policymaker when we are trying to find an approach whereby we can have large number of girls in education. And it is just, not a matter of number, it is a matter of enrollment and the retention in the school itself. So we will look into ways of keeping girls into education, into school.
Because the question of gender is a problem, right? I think maybe this project is going to lay a foundation, maybe to make a change in our education system. It's going to have an impact in terms of changing or transforming this society to another level, to understand the gender equity and the gender inequity.
Yes, we really do need to consider what education does mean for the women and girls around the world. And we also have to remember that when we're talking about women and girls and gender, we also have to think of relationships between the women and girls and the boys and the men, because gender is encompassing of good relationships, good empathy, good understanding between the girls and the boys, between the women and the men. And unfortunately, the attitudes of certain members of the population tend to feel that it's a negative rather than a positive. And that's where education can come in. Access to education is something we really need to strive for. However, we need to have education that is relevant to girls. You go into some schools and some institutions and you can't see the women and girls in the texts. You can't see them in occupations that they can aspire to. It is very difficult for them to understand where they might be able to go, and that's what we need to empower them to do.
If I were to be asked to give advice to teachers and to pupils at schools as to how to address gender issues in future, I would have a simple bit of advice. Men aren't the enemy, boys aren't the enemy. It's how men and women and boys and girls are socialized that makes them behave in the way that they do. So you as teachers and the parents and as future parents need to be very conscious of how you raise your children up, because it's the kind of role model that you are as teachers and as parents that rubs off onto your children, and then they behave in a similar way. It's very interesting to find that children who come from divorced homes often end up also being divorced, and the patterns repeat themselves. So I think it's very important that the socializing process is where we focus on, both in schools as well as outside of schools. And I'm appealing to you to get that right.